And welcome to the Victorious Souls podcast today with me, Danielle Burnock, your host, that lady on the internet who loves you, from DanielleBurnock.com, connecting you to the love that heals. Today, I have with me Susan Ford. She is an author, she is a coach, she is a former fundamentalist Baptist, which we'll get into that, sharing her journey from legalism through atheism to grace. So thank you for being on the show with me today, Susan. I can't wait for you to share your story. I think this is such an important topic for us to be talking about at this time.
Oh, thank you, Danielle. I'm so excited to share this with everybody.
Well, I wanted to start with, because you have this great big long journey that you went through, but why don't you share a little bit about your childhood at home? What was your childhood like at home?
My childhood at home was amazing. My parents loved the holidays. It was always a big thing. Birthdays were special. I'm talking custom birthday cakes shaped like Barbie dolls and castles. And my mom getting us clothes from the thrift stores. We could dress up like princesses, and she did our hair. It was over the top, beautiful. Holidays, inviting everyone over, having those big Christmas parties, and people from the church coming over, sing Christmas carols, and everyone coming over and having a potluck and playing games. And so my family at home, I have one sister, my mom and dad, and that was really beautiful growing up.
Wow. Do you have a big family, like extended family, or?
No, not really.
Oh, okay.
Very small.
Okay, because you have all the people over, so it was people from church that
People
came
from
over.
church. Yeah,
Awesome.
we'd have lots of people from church and friends.
Oh, so what was your childhood like at church as opposed to at home?
At church, that's definitely more complicated, hence my book. So the church, we moved churches when I was 8. The first church we were at was kind of a standard Baptist church. I really don't have any very significant memories of it other than the pastor being really fabulous and loving the kids and just like a grandfather. He was great.
That's cool.
But the second church that we moved to when I was 8, we stayed till I was 16. It was a independent fundamental Baptist church, is how they defined themselves at the time.
Okay.
And I would call them fundamentalist. I know we'll touch on that later. I'll explain to all of you what in the world that means. Everyone defines it differently, but lots of law, lots of fire and brimstone, not a lot of grace to offer. Very, very focused on following the rules. These are all the rules laid out, how to be a Christian, how to do it right. And you need to follow them. This is important. And if you don't, here's all the heaping helpings of guilt to pile on top of you if you screw this up.
Wow.
So
did you like going to church as a kid, or did they drag you to church, or?
Oh, I dreaded it. I dreaded it, but it was a very clear expectation that this is what you do. On Sunday mornings, we would go to Sunday school and church service. So we were there from about 9 a.m. till about noon. And it was one of those churches where everyone hangs around afterward and you talk. And my dad's a total extrovert, so he loved socializing. So by the time you leave, it was about 1:30 in the afternoon. And then we were there on Wednesday nights for Awana. It's a children's youth group type ministry. That was on Wednesday nights. So it was at least 2 days a week that we were there. But
so now we get into what is a fundamentalist.
And that is a good question, because everyone defines it differently. It's definitely one of those terms in Christianity. Some people will label, oh, this person's a fundamentalist. And
yeah, it gets thrown around a lot. That's why I wanted to talk about it, because I don't even know if someone asked me if I would know how to answer that, but I'm sure I have a preconceived notion in there somewhere.
I think we all have our own definitions of what that means. And depending where you are in the spectrum of Christianity, you're going to have a different answer. So for me, as I did my research and in my book, the way I use fundamentalist is someone who has the fundamentals of Christian faith, which are often defined as believing in the Trinity, believing in the virgin birth of Jesus, believing that he's the savior. There's the list of the core beliefs that most Christians subscribe to. Those are the fundamentals. Okay. But fundamentalists go beyond that. They say, okay, these are fundamental, these are essential. You must believe these core pieces to be a Christian, but that's not enough. For a fundamentalist, we're going to add layers on top of that. And in my church, you end up with things like women wearing dresses, or using only the King James version of the Bible, no percussion instruments, those sort of things. They get layered in, and instead of being secondary or tertiary points of doctrine where you can agree to disagree, it doesn't mean that other people will think you're not a Christian. For a fundamentalist, they're going to tell you, oh, you must not be a Christian you went to that movie, you're a woman, you wore pants, they could say that you might not be Christian at all.
Wow. Yeah, I laughed at the whole King James thing because I was in there. That's part of my history with that's
Okay.
the only real one. All the other
Yes.
ones are heresy and they're gonna take you all to hell.
Absolutely. You're gonna go down a slippery slope if you any other version.
Wow, and I'm wearing pants. Oh no.
Oh, you're wearing pants. See? The fundamentalists will not like you.
Wow. So what would they do? Would they say that people were lost if they didn't adhere to all these things? They were going to hell, or they were backslidden, or like what would they do?
There were varying shades of disdain, but there was a lot of talk about how people who believed exactly as we did, so other independent fundamental Baptist churches, which is a very small little sliver of Christianity, as I realize now, but did not know then because it was all I knew.
Yeah.
If you don't believe exactly like this, you're varying shades of wrong. So just depending how off you are, you're going to be judged, and you're going to be, don't talk to those people. They're going to mess you up. My best friend is Lutheran. And so, they would kind of believe she's probably Christian, but there would be still some judgment on just the different nuances of faith that for a lot of Christians, you would say, that's your Christian liberty to believe as you believe on that point, and I'm not going to judge you for it. But in the church I grew up in, it was, be careful, don't talk to those people. They could confuse you. They could take you away from the exact truth of Christianity, which is what we are telling you.
Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of fear too.
A lot of fear. Yes, it was very much an extrinsically driven, fear-based type of church. Follow all the rules. It wasn't about, they would casually mention having a personal relationship with Jesus, but it seemed like it was mainly focused on legislation. If we legislate and make you follow all these rules, then that is how you have this relationship. Well, wow. I don't know many of us who can be legislated into love or connection. That's not me. I think it's not a lot of us.
I don't think anyone has a legislated relationship with anybody.
No, how do you feel if you're with your spouse or you're with someone who's close to you? I mean, if they're giving you all these rules, I will love you if, there's a lot of I will love you ifs in that kind of church. You are lovable if
that's conditional love.
Rules,
that's conditional love.
Very conditional, very cold.
Yeah. So you talk about recognizing and processing and healing from religious trauma. Can you unpack what religious trauma is for our listeners and what you mean by recognizing and processing and heal? Like, what all is that?
So religious trauma essentially is any sort of experience, teachings, interactions that caused you not just hurt. There's church hurt, and that is difficult in itself, and that's a kind of a different tier of pain within the church. Trauma, think about if you've heard of post-traumatic stress, where it's something that has triggers and it brings you back to this time. The hurt was to such an extent that it alters your present. Even though it happened in the past, it's coming up and it's changing. It has fundamentally altered the way that you view God, Christianity, all of it. And it's different for all of us. And so that's what I mean when I say to recognize it, because everyone experiences things differently and people's traumas are different. My sister's 4 years younger than me. She was raised in the same church as me, and she did not experience religious trauma. Same church, same teachings. And she said that for her, she was able to listen to the messages that were being given by the pastor and say, you know what? No, that doesn't make sense. That is not God. And she filtered it out. I don't know how she did it. She was very young at the time, but
wow.
So for her, it wasn't traumatic. But for me, I don't know if it's the whole firstborn perfectionist. I was very much always a rule follower. So that was intrinsic to my own nature anyway. And then I was being told that was required from a church setting. So it's kind of a double layer of, I'm already leaning that way of trying to be good, follow the rules, do the right thing. And then the church is saying you must be good and follow the rules. So when you stack all of that, I think that's why for me, those messages were more traumatic, because they were saying, if you don't follow all the rules, you're not worthy. You're a horrible person. But everyone's religious trauma is different. So recognizing what is it that happened in the church, in any kind of religious context in your past that's still coloring the way you view your spirituality today. Why do you believe what you believe? And kind of going back, tracing those steps. We're the sum of our experiences, right? And we all experience things differently, and it all adds up and it creates who we are today.
Yeah.
And if you don't actually, when you're trying to deal with the religious trauma, a big part of that is recognizing those pieces and how they're still affecting you.
So how did you do that? How did you recognize it? And because I think you said it was 18 when you gave yourself permission to do something about it, but you said you were at that church from 8 to 16. So how did you recognize it, and then share your journey with us? How'd you do that?
We were at that very fundamentalist church till I was 16. And then from 16 to 18, I was with my parents. It's a church they're still at. It's just kind of your average Bible church, Bible believing, middle of the road, standard church.
What made y'all switch from that one to the other one? Y'all, like I'm from Georgia or something. Oh my goodness, y'all. I can't believe I said that. I'm in Michigan. I'm not in Georgia.
Texas. Well, we'd actually, my dad had been one of the head deacons in the church, and there were two pastors at that second church that we were at. My dad helped find the second one. We stayed for a while afterward, but my dad, when I talked to him about it last year, he said that he did recognize it wasn't a very healthy church. It just wasn't in a good place. But when you're part of the pastoral committee, you're bringing someone in, you don't feel like you can just leave the next day, right? You help hire someone, you go through the whole process. You're that form of continuity as the head deacon, even if you don't necessarily feel this is the right place for your family to be right now. My dad has a great sense of duty and honor and following through on what he committed to. And so he just didn't feel like he could up and leave. And that's why I think it took a couple of years. That new pastor got settled in, church was fully handed off to him. It's his church. And I think that's when my dad felt the freedom to say, you know what, we don't really fully align. And I didn't know that at the time. That was something I only learned that after having the very hard, awkward conversations with my parents last year.
Wow.
I learned that actually there was a disconnect in some points between what the pastor was saying, what they believed. But I didn't feel it was safe to say anything, to question. So I didn't tell them. They didn't know how I was feeling, and I didn't know how they were believing. And in emergency medicine, we call it Swiss cheese. There's all there's the holes that you can fall through in a system. There's all these different checks and balances that are supposed to keep people safe and make sure that a patient doesn't fall through the holes and die in the medical system. And spiritually, it's kind of what happened with me. It was you should be able to talk to your parents and say, hey, I have these questions and I don't know the answers, but I'm questioning this. And I didn't feel safe to do that because of the context the pastor had given in that church, which was, we're telling you the truth. We're telling you the whole truth. This is
nothing
how it
but
is.
The truth, so help us God.
Nothing but the truth, so help us God. And we do not question. If you question, you're on that slippery slope to backsliding and being one of them. And you don't want to start down that road. And people, often the Christians in that church were just not comfortable with questions. If you're questioning, that's dangerous. And it's almost like it was infectious.
I wrote about that in my book about questions. I didn't ask questions for the long time, and I came across a gentleman who had a quote that he wrote that just made it so beautiful. He said, "Questions are the tools of the explorer."
Ooh,
I'm like
that.
Questions are good.
Questions are good. And that is not something they teach you in a very conservative, very strict religious setting. Questions are dangerous to the people in charge in that kind of setting. And they make everybody else nervous.
Yeah. So how did you begin to process that? What did you do?
So I finally, it was when I went to college, which I think, kind of standard, right? A lot of us, once you leave the house, you have a little bit more freedom to kind of say, I'm becoming an adult. What do I believe? And I researched, and at that point it was very intellectual. It was very, I'm going to go online and I'm going to just type in, does God exist? Is God real? Is all these kinds of queries to say, or I would type best arguments for Christianity, and then best arguments against Christianity, or best arguments for atheism. It's funny because looking back, I didn't start by exploring different types of Christianity. It was just, is Christianity as a whole true, not true? And I think that was because of how I was raised, that the one type of Christianity that I was raised in is the only right Christianity. So there was no need to consider any other type, right? The fundamentalist Baptist church, that is it. That is, if you're Christian, this is what you are. So I didn't consider any of the nuances of Christianity and other denominations of Christianity, but I looked at other world religions. And then I really centered in on the whole, is God real? Is God not real? Because I felt like I need to answer that, because if God's not real, then all the rest of this I don't even need to worry about. It's the question's answered. We're done. Check the box and move on to the next thing in life. And the intellectual side of that led me to atheism at the time. And so I was about 20 when I became an atheist, and I was an atheist for about 7 years. And really thought that I was done. I'd spent the whole first 18 years of my life in the church, and then I'd spent a few years questioning and figuring it out. And I thought, you know what? I've devoted so much of my young life to religion and spirituality and trying to sort all this out. I am so glad to be done with that part, have that sorted out, and move on to something else. And my mom likes to say that God has a sense of humor. I think I tend to agree with her now. I met my husband when I was 26, and he was a Christian, and he knew I was an atheist, and we connected on so many other levels. And so it was kind of one of those things that we agreed to disagree on. And I know that for some people, it sounds crazy because it's very big, right? Politics and religion are your two very big things that
I have a friend who is married to an atheist. So yes, I understand this.
Okay, so it is possible. And so we agreed to that, and he agreed. We kind of agreed to respect each other's beliefs and to not try to shove what we believed on the other person. But he did encourage me to explore a few more things. He said, I'm just curious, how do you address all these people who've had near-death experiences? So many people have written about. At that point, being an atheist, I didn't believe in people having souls or any. It was just basically my belief at that time was very scientific. With death happens, you are done, that is the end. And he said, well, okay, but if there's no spirit that can detach from the body and go somewhere else, and how do you explain all these near-death experiences? And this is the important part of, for me, going on this journey of trying to figure out what you believe, why you believe it, and if you change your mind. It's committing to seeking truth and then following truth wherever that truth takes you. And doing that up front before you start, because I don't know about you, but sometimes you start asking questions and getting answers and they're not going. We all have our preconceived, the way we want to go, the way we're hoping these answers are going to go. And if the answers aren't going there, it's really easy to say, you know what, never mind, put that in a box. We're going to stop right here, because that's not where I want to go. And when I first started on my journey of questioning, giving myself permission to question what I believed, that was one of the things that I had come up with, was saying, you know what, I want to make sure that I'm seeking the truth, whatever that is, wherever that goes. I'm asking questions to seek truth, and I'm committing to myself right now that I'm going to follow that truth wherever that goes. If I've vetted it out and it checks out to be true, all right, this is where I'm going, whether I actually would prefer to go that way or not. And that kind of all circled back around, because as my husband said, I'm really curious about that. What are your thoughts? I did read some more of the near-death experiences, and there were just so many that at some point I said, statistically, sure, you can say a certain percentage of these are fabricated. People just wanted attention. People wanted to make something up, or okay. But statistically, that many, in some of the similarities and everything, that seemed to warrant that at least, we could have souls. Maybe, I don't know how, and maybe that we just happen to have souls, and that doesn't mean that there's a God or anything like that. We just have souls. Okay, all right, maybe. I don't like it, but maybe. And I just started getting, shortly after that, I just started getting all these little clues. It reminded me very much of when I was little, and my mom would make us these little treasure maps for birthday parties sometimes. She would do the little, write you the clues, and the clue takes you to the next place, and you find another clue, and at the end of it, there's this fun little pirate treasure chest, and there's all the little jewelry and the coins, and it was so much fun. All my friends always loved it. And this reminded me of that, where it was, okay, you get this little clue about there being souls. Well, maybe there are souls. Okay, well, if we have a soul, does there have to be some higher power that created that soul? Can that soul just exist organically without having come from anywhere? Well, a soul seems to be rather complex. So, okay, maybe not. That seems like might be a bit of a stretch, that it just appeared out of nowhere. And I was kind of pondering, questioning, trying to figure out. I got to that point where I think a lot of us get, where we say, okay, maybe I'm here for a reason. And if you're here for a reason, what is that reason? Why am I here? The big existential question, right? That we all want. Why am I here? What is my purpose in life? And I think a lot of us ask that, but I didn't expect to have a word pop in my head as an answer to that. And let alone for it to be a word that I had never heard of, had no context for this. And I just kind of scribbled it down the best I could. I'm like, I don't know where this random word, phrase, whatever popped in my head, but I'm seeking truth, and I'm at least going to go Google this and see if it comes up with anything. And I did. And it was a Hebrew word from a song. And the rough translation it's ulame is the word, and it's my people, my sanctuary. The phrase in the song is seek after my people, my sanctuary, my home. And that had come up in the context of me wondering why I'm here and what my purpose is and what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's a Hebrew word, so that kind of ties it back a little nervously close to, the God of the Bible and that all of that. But okay, kind of took note, wrote it down. Okay, moving on. And my husband and I were doing full-time RVing, and we were at a gem and mineral show, and we were talking to someone, and someone came up and gave us this little stick of wood and said, hey, this smells really good when you burn it. It's a really, really good scented wood and everything. And have you ever heard of it? It's called Palo Santo. And I looked it up, and it means holy wood. And it is related to frankincense and myrrh. And of course, where have we heard of frankincense and myrrh put together? Well, only place I know of that I've really heard of it a lot is, of course, in the Bible. And so it's just kind of these different random clues and things that all kind of pointed in that direction. And it was just a crazy type of thing where I started getting all these different, felt like little nudges. It felt like little, hey, you know what? You said you're seeking truth. Okay, are you really going to follow where this truth is going? And on Valentine's Day of 2019, my husband came to me and he said, you know what, I feel like I have this really, I just feel like there's this thing I need to tell you, that it's really important for me to share something with you. And the way he describes it is that he felt like he was given words to share with me that weren't his words, that he just, and I've heard other people say, they felt like God impressed upon them a message, or I think everyone phrases this type of experience differently.
Yeah, because it's hard to convey that, because there have been people out there that said, God told me to tell you this, God told me to tell you this. And sometimes they're just loony bins. And so people, they hesitate to say, God told me to tell you this, because, because I really think he did, but I don't want you to think I'm a loony tune. But he does speak through us. I mean, he said that, what was it, ulame?
Ulame, yeah. That popped in my head, that I'd never heard of that. And then I certainly
and
wouldn't
so
have known
where does this come from if you've never heard of it before? He's done this with me before when I was writing my first book, and I was upset about something and I was so frustrated. I was taking so long to heal. And I got a word that popped in my head, and I went to Google, and is this really a word?
and there it was.
There it was.
Personal to you also, right? It was something that if someone else had gotten that, it was personal to you at your point in your journey. I would guess, because that's how mine was. And the message that my husband was given to share with me was also very, very personal. And I share little bits of it in my book. A lot of it kind of feel like in Luke, when they say Mary kept these things and treasured them in her heart.
Gotcha.
I feel like a certain amount of that is just for me. But but I did share pieces of it because it was just such a surreal, incredible experience that I felt very nervous to talk about for the longest time, because you don't want to sound crazy. And
really, I'm not crazy. Really, I'm not.
It felt crazy. It
and the
felt
crazy
very
lady
crazy.
is saying, I'm not crazy.
I'm not crazy. But it was so personal and so nuanced, and so things my husband didn't know, and things even that I had prayed about when I was 12 years old. I had prayed for a personal Jesus, for having that personal experience of a relationship with God that I hadn't had and that I didn't think was possible. And I was 12, and at this time I was 30, 29, 30 at the time. That's a long time. I mean, I guess not long when you look at how long Abraham and Sarah waited for children or things like that, but in my human lifetime, that was a very long time.
Yeah.
And didn't think that was going to happen. And so getting all this, that was kind of a big dose of truth, where I'm saying, oh, I don't know about this. I said I was following truth, right? I was seeking truth and following truth. And actually, before my husband shared that message, it was so respectful. He paused. He told me that he had something he felt like he needed to share with me, and that it was related to God, and that he was not going to share it unless I said I was okay with it. And that was really important to me, because it was kind of
so much honor.
Yes.
That's honor.
Yes. That's one of the first times that someone had, everyone seems to want to evangelize so much, to just shove the message of belief down people's throats. And that was the first time that someone had said, you know what? I have this thing, and I think it's really beautiful and special and meant for you, and it's related to God, but I am not going to shove it at you. If you say you want to hear it, I would love to share it with you. And if you say no, I will walk away. And that freedom to know that I 100% could choose to say yes or no was incredible.
Yeah. I got goosebumps all over.
that was an amazing, amazing gift. It's just beautiful. And so he had that conversation with me, and then 9 days, I was still trying to process all this. I'm like, okay, I think that seemed like some of those things that were said. I don't know where that could have come from other than the God of the Bible, but I don't know how to process all of that, because it felt loving. It felt very different from the God that I was introduced to in the fundamentalist church.
Oh yeah.
Those two did not match. There was a huge dichotomy between them. And if any of you are familiar with the term cognitive dissonance, it's when you're believing something and then new information comes in and it conflicts. And in your brain, you're experiencing this disconnect of, I believe this thing, but now I've seen this and I believe this other thing too, and the two don't match. And how do I resolve that?
Yeah.
And that's essentially the second half of my book, is that process of, okay, based on following the truth and going where the truth leads me, I've come to this place where I have to conclude that I believe God is real, but this loving, expansive, amazing God that I was just introduced to does not match this cold, I think in my book I described it as a helicopter deity of a parent, just right over your shoulder and micromanaging and feeling like a chess piece in some big cosmic game. The two did not match, and I had to figure out deal with that. And so that was, for me, my process, the things I had to go through, and then all the baggage that came up after that. Because as an atheist, a lot of the religious trauma was very muted, because I was able to kind of compartmentalize all of it and say, you know what, I no longer believe God is real. And so, yes, things happen in the church, and I'm upset that I spent so much time in the church that, now I no longer believe these things, but at least it's simple, it's neat. All of that was not true. And I'm just going to move on with my life.
Yeah.
And I had done that. And this was like peeling scabs off wounds that you thought had healed and they hadn't healed, and going back to all kinds of dark and scary places. And it was hard. It was a hard process, and a process that I think Christians aren't really equipped to meet someone on and support someone with. Because I had people, well-meaning Christians, after I came back to saying, okay, I believe in God, I've had multiple well-meaning Christians who have initially at the very beginning of that journey who kind of questioned my salvation, questioned my belief, because I was struggling with things like being comfortable reading the Bible. Well, it had all this baggage. You read one verse and you in your head hear all the ways that it was applied in a negative, hurtful way by a pastor. Right? I'm sure you could relate.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is part of my story.
You're not coming at it with a blank slate.
No.
You just come back and pick up the Bible. It's that people say, oh, just read the Bible. I don't like that phrase, just read the Bible. I think that it's complicated and nuanced. And for someone with religious trauma, reading the Bible can be triggering.
Yeah.
And people don't understand. I mean, I had, because of the extent of my religious upbringing, when I had trouble reading the Bible, I went so far as to get scared and question, could I somehow be possessed by demons and I don't know it? And that's why I can't read the Bible, because I've heard that if you have trouble reading the Bible, maybe there's a demon. It was terrifying. It was terrifying. And I would Google things like, trying to understand. I finally found the term religious trauma by a whole bunch of just different Google searches. And finally that came up, and I hadn't even had a word for it until then. And at least now I had a word. Okay, I read the description. I said, oh, yes, that sounds like me. Pervasive harm that was caused by religious experiences and it keeps affecting you today. Okay, that sounds like me. But then what I realized was when I started looking for resources and, okay, how do I deal with this? I don't want to just wallow in it. I do want to process and heal and move on and not have this be a part of my story, but not have this be my whole story.
Yeah.
And so many of the resources that were very, very supportive of healing from religious trauma, but they were people who had left the faith and not returned. Mm-hmm. So they were approaching healing from a place of atheism.
Yeah.
A lot of them. And at this point, I was looking for the whole complex. It's even more complex when you've believed it, been hurt, left it, thought you were done, thought you had it all sorted out. Suddenly you get the little cosmic smack over the head saying, hello, knock, knock, I'm here. And coming back to it and trying to figure out, now having that dredge up all this baggage that you are just not equipped to process and deal with. And it was so hard to find resources. And I think that was a big part. I didn't want to write this book, but God was very insistent about it. I think partially for my own journey and processing and kind of it put a timeline on me actually dealing with some things that maybe I would have kicked down the road further. But I think also for putting that out there and being another resource for people to say, here's a template, here's how I've walked through this journey. And I'm not trying to give you a cookie cutter of exactly how to do it for you, because you are personal and we each have our own journey to walk. I'm just giving you some suggestions, support, encouragement that if what you're going through feels complex and scary and crazy and like people don't relate, that you are not alone and that you're not the only one who is trying to navigate that really strange, considering a return to faith after religious trauma.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe there's a lot more of us out there than people know, and we're starting to come out of the woodwork.
Yes.
Like you wrote your book, I wrote mine a while back. I interviewed my new friend, Dr. Janine McConaughey. She wrote the book,
Yes.
Trauma in the Pews, which is about not being hurt in the church. It's about traumatized people going to church and being re-traumatized because they are struggling with spiritual practices because they have trauma, and it's not a spiritual problem. It's a psychological problem. It's a physical problem. It's a different kind of problem. And the church really does need to be trauma informed.
They do. Well, and so many, especially the fundamentalist type churches, the kind I grew up in, they view if you have any sort of, especially psychological challenges, emotional challenges, their first question is, well, where have you sinned? Where are you not close to God? What did you do wrong that you're hurting?
Yeah.
And that's
not right.
That's not helpful.
No,
that is really not.
It is
all it does is teach you, okay, don't say anything. Just show up on Sunday and pretend that you're okay, because that's what you need to do. And everyone shows up, and the kind of churches that I grew up in, everyone shows up and everyone pretends to be perfect, to be happy, to be all the things that they believe a good Christian should be.
Yeah. It's so sad.
You're all just hurting underneath all that. You're all hurting and questioning and not able to be open about it.
Yeah.
have that community that the church is actually meant to be, to support each other and grow together.
Yeah.
You don't get that.
So what was the hardest part of your journey? Was it how they treated you when you came back, or you couldn't find resources, or reading the Bible?
There were a
There's
lot of hard
lots of hard
parts.
places.
There's lots of hard places. If I had to narrow it down, though, I would say it was, and sometimes continues to be, the letting go of perfectionism and forgiving yourself. Because the church, the fundamentalist church, was so rigid on being perfect that even though they tell you you're saved by grace, you just believe and you're saved by grace, but the actions and the subtext that they gave was very much works-based. It was very much, you still need to check these boxes because that's how you prove that you're a Christian. And if you're not checking these boxes, you are proving to us that you are not a Christian. And so anything short of perfectionism has been ingrained in me to mean you may not be a Christian, you may not be good enough, you may not be valuable enough. And that it's a very pervasive message, especially when you've received it since you were a little kid.
Yeah.
So finding that space to say, you know what, there are multiple instances in the New Testament where disciples have said that they're not perfect and have acknowledged that they're not perfect and said, you know what, God knows that you're not going to be perfect. You're supposed to be. I mean, that was the original perfect world, but that's the whole reason that Jesus came back, was to say, you know what, I get that you guys cannot do this perfection thing. I understood, and I love you so much, I will do it for you.
Awesome.
And that is what I wish someone would have told me, is that, you know what, you do not have to be perfect because Jesus did it for you. Presenting it that way versus presenting it as you were so bad that someone had to die for you. No, it was someone loved you so much to say, I'll be perfect for you.
Yeah.
And I wish that that's what you tell little kids, not tell them how horrible they are.
Yeah.
Approach it from love, not from fear, not from, make it that the whole perfect love drives out fear.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's
Definitely.
a long journey to get there, but it's beautiful. And I think maybe those of us who've gone through this kind of journey, the upside is that you do get to perhaps feel it more and appreciate it more because of all the struggles you've gone through to get there. So I don't wish religious trauma on anyone, but I'd say for those who have gone through it, that is what can come out on the other side, is this really profound gratitude for that love.
Definitely. I know I feel that. That's why I call myself that lady on the internet who loves you. And I'm out there promoting the message of love, because that's what we need. The Bible says God is love, and we're created in his image and likeness. So we're created in the image and likeness of love. That's our greatest need in life, is love.
Right.
The way I view it is like we're made out of love. The very fabric of our being is made out of love. And so why wouldn't we need it?
Yes. And the following all the rules and all that. When you love someone, you want to please them, you want to make them happy, and you want to have this beautiful, great relationship with them. That flows organically and naturally out of love, not the other way around, not follow all these rules and then you will love. Well, no, I don't love the boss who tells me to follow all the rules and do all these things. No, you tolerate that and you put up with it and you want to run away from it as soon as you possibly can.
Yeah, like people out there who slam what they call hyper grace because it's giving people a license to sin.
Right.
And what I have shared with people and with pastors and stuff like that is, anyone who really tastes the grace of God, all they want to do is what you said. They want to reciprocate. They're just so thankful, so grateful. That's what it invokes in you, and then our humanity, we screw up. So then
we screw up. But I don't know if you've watched The Chosen, but I loved, and I put this in my book, the season 2, episode 5, it shows Mary Magdalene, and it shows her stumbling, it shows her falling, it shows her being triggered by things from her past. And even though she loves Jesus, believes in him, is following him, she gets triggered and she goes back to her old coping mechanisms and her vices and all these things. And when she comes back to him, there's this beautiful, beautiful scene where
I love this.
You love that he looks at her and he says, you know what, did you think that you were always going to be perfect, that you'd never stumble? And she says, I shouldn't. She feels so guilty. And she says, I shouldn't do that. And he said, the Father and I just want your heart, and that's what you've already given us, and the rest will come in time.
Yeah.
And it's a process. That's that whole sanctification process, right? It's not a one-time thing, and it's growth, and we're going to screw up. And when the fundamentalist church has no room for those mistakes and no room for that humanity, it makes you feel like, well, if you can't, my mother actually said that the impression she got was that I felt like if I couldn't be a perfect Christian, that I wouldn't be a Christian at all. And that's partially true, because that was the way it was presented. It was Christians are perfect. So if you're not perfect, you're not a Christian. And that's
a big
true.
fat lie.
It's a very big fat lie. That is not at all true.
So how can other Christians who maybe have not gone through this and really have no concept of it, how can they help others who are struggling when they come back? And did anyone help you?
I think one of the biggest things they can do, and it's uncomfortable. If you've not been there, I recognize that it's uncomfortable, but it's to hold space for that, to listen, to really seek to understand. You don't have to have all the answers. A lot of times, we don't expect you to have the answers. It is complex. It is crazy. We don't have the answers. But if you can listen, what I would say to Christians who haven't been there but genuinely want to be supportive, be brave enough to hear what someone's saying and to not feel that that's dangerous to your faith, that you understanding them is not dangerous.
Oh, I love that. It's not dangerous to your faith. It's like I talk to some people about what I do, and their response is so defensive. Because I feel like they feel like I'm a danger to them, or I'm going to be a danger to others because of what I share. And it's like, yeah, you use that word danger. That just completely explained an exchange I had a week or two ago with someone, and how they responded was, I had a hard time finding the words to convey that of what happened. I just felt different because I had a conversation with this person and a conversation with this person, and this person was, I felt completely safe and everything, but over here it was like I was a danger. You need to make sure, and you got to be careful about, and you're doing this, right? It's like,
right, you might be infectious to me. Please stay over there. That's how I sometimes
wear a mask.
The church. Like, yeah, wear your mask, 6 feet, social distance, please, because I don't want what you have terrifies me. And actually, that was something that I had experienced before I left the church. It was when I was 16, and I was very, very depressed. And my parents took me into a doctor to get seen. And she had asked, it was just the doctor and me alone in the room. And she asked kind of, what's going on? Why, what's the core? Why are you feeling this way? And I actually very vulnerably shared. I said something to the effect of, it's the church. And she was a Christian in a different church. And her immediate reflective response was, oh, it's not that, is it? Just shut that down. She felt threatened.
Wow.
And as a 16-year-old, I just barely managed to share that little bit of
just smashed
what
you
I was
down.
experiencing that I had not shared with anybody. And it was just crushed.
Wow.
It was just, okay. So I just kind of backpedaled and put that away until I was a grown up and it was safe, because that was not, as a Christian, she felt very, very threatened by the idea that the church could cause this kind of pain and this kind of harm, and feeling this way.
Yeah.
I would so love it if other Christians could just be brave and just listen. You don't have to have answers.
Yeah.
But just hear, just show up and hear.
Yeah. And you have your book. Do you have your book with you?
I do.
Show us your book and tell us about your book and explain this parentheses thing.
The parentheses. This is beyond the parentheses. Which actually the title, I did not come up with the title. That was as they say, a God thing. That was personal to me as a writer. Parentheses in writing enclose pieces of a sentence, and those pieces are separated from the rest of the sentence. They're kind of encapsulated within these confines. And in the context of religion and spirituality, the parentheses are those barriers that block you from seeing the full spectrum of belief, the full, in my case, parentheses are the fundamentalist Baptist church that said the only way of seeing Christianity, the only way to be a true Christian is within this. We're holding you within these barriers. Don't look at anything else outside. Anything else beyond there is absolutely wrong. We are the only truth. We are the only right way to think. And so beyond the parentheses is that journey of whatever it is for everyone personally, just seeking truth, following truth, asking those questions, and moving beyond whatever it is that's limiting, holding you back, framing in a negative way, framing the way you view spirituality and view the possibility of faith.
Wow. And have you had backlash with this book? Because I would think that some churches would really, like we talked about, some people feel threatened. Have you run into people are going, wait a minute, you're trying to destroy the body of Christ. What's wrong with you?
Exactly. You're one of those. I haven't gotten a lot of that yet, but I expect as I continue to share, as I continue to talk about this, yes, that is definitely something I anticipate, because again, that defensiveness, it's coming from a place of feeling threatened, and then also a place of not wanting to be the one who's caused harm. It's very another unexpected little thing to come out of this book. My parents are still in contact with one of the last pastors at that church that we were at, the very fire and brimstone one, and they're sending him a copy of this book. They've still talked to him over the years, and he actually has expressed an interest in understanding, because he's had members of his own family who have had issues with his preaching and the way he relates to God and shares God. And so that gives me hope that even though there's going to be backlash, and I do believe that's going to happen, at the same time, some of the people who you'd expect the most backlash from, I mean, the person who instigated a lot of my religious trauma, has actually said, you know what, I want to understand. I'm willing to read your story and hear, and I want to understand too. So
that's awesome. How exciting for the possibilities of people who are stuck in this religious trauma, dishing it out, that they could be saved out of it themselves, that they could come out of that and have a different view. Because even other kinds of trauma, they can be passed on from generation to generation because of habits, because of behaviors, because it's in our DNA and various other things. I won't get into all the science. But with religious trauma, it can be that way too. Well, that's the way they were raised, and so that's all they know. And so they're just doing, what they were told. I cut the ham in half because my grandma always cut the ham in half.
Exactly.
Well, why did she do that? Because the pan, it wouldn't fit in the pan. Well, it'll fit in my pan. Well, she always cut it in half.
Exactly. No one knows why we're wasting half the ham, because this is just what we do.
Yeah.
But so that gives me so much hope. And then my parents have even come to a place. They initially weren't thrilled about this book, because it's as vulnerable as it is for me to share my story. It's also very vulnerable for them, because they are such loving parents, and they genuinely wanted the best for my sister and for me. And they gave us this, outside of the church, they gave us this really great childhood. And the experiences for me within that church were very negative, but that was not their intent. And so this has been kind of a hard thing for them, with me putting my story out there and being vulnerable in that way. I'm also taking them with me on that journey of the vulnerability. And that's been a challenge, understandably, for them. But
what a thing to model. What hope to model for others, that they're doing that. That is amazing. I talk about my mother. I had childhood emotional neglect. She had lots of trauma and stuff together, but we rebuilt our relationship and we built a bridge. And so I champion her all the time. She was part of my trauma, but then she was part of my healing at the same time. And that takes heart from people to do that, to move to that other position. So I champion your parents for doing that as well. Something I wrote about in my book is I believe God gave it to me. It's mathematical equation, because I wrestled with, owning the truth of trauma when people didn't mean to.
Yes.
when they
Oh,
did their best. Like Dr. Janice
yes,
Webb
I
has a
agree.
book called Running on Empty, talking about childhood emotional neglect. There's 12 different ways. Well, the biggest way is well-meaning parents who were traumatized or neglected themselves. They're doing the best they know how, but something still goes terribly wrong. And how
Yeah.
God gave it to me, I believe from my book, is no malice does not equal no harm. You don't have to have malice to harm someone. But we think that if I was
Yes.
harmed, they
Yes.
must have meant to hurt me. Not always.
Mhm.
Sometimes, bullies and things like that, they set
Right.
out to harm you, but there are those that harm you and, oh, I didn't mean to do that.
Right. And that's where we can
And
give
we
them the
need to stop
grace.
in that place and let them feel that. Let me
Mhm.
still own, let you still own the trauma that did take place. Harm
Right.
did take place. But we
Exactly.
can highlight there was no malice.
Right.
There was no malicious behavior. It was a byproduct of something went terribly wrong. That's how my counselor had said it in
Exactly.
counseling. Something went terribly wrong.
Something went terribly wrong. But you're right. It wasn't always intentional. And then the
Yeah,
flip side of that too, I think, is that sometimes people will say, well, if they didn't mean to hurt me, then I must not have been hurt. I can't.
exactly.
No, you can be traumatized and you can be hurt, even by
Yeah,
people who didn't mean to.
right. And
But if they
that's
didn't
so
mean to,
important to own
if they,
that.
yes, own your trauma and let them own that they hurt you. Give them the chance to own it and give them
Hmm.
the chance to move on. Give them the grace so
Yeah,
that they can move on. You can move on, especially when they didn't mean it. And that's been a process that my parents and I have kind of gone through. And
that's so
now
beautiful.
it's been beautiful because now in their church, their new church that they're at, they lead a home group and they've actually had they've shared that they've had these amazing conversations in their home group with other parents who've said, you know what, my children left the faith too. And I've been quietly questioning if I was a bad parent, what I did wrong, or I don't know how to relate to them, how to talk to them, how to connect with them anymore. And I've felt so isolated. And my parents have said that by them taking the leap and being vulnerable and sharing that I wrote this book and them actually sharing the book with the people in their group, it's opened all these doors and conversations where people feel safe to share.
Wow, that's awesome.
It's
So before we
incredible.
sign off here, what is something you want to make sure that people know? Something if they come away from this with one thing, what's something you want to make sure that you can say to them today?
Hmm. For anyone who's on this kind of a journey of questioning, they're not sure what they believe spiritually, it's complicated, I would say just focus on seeking the truth. Focus on seeking the truth, confirming it to be true, and the rest of it will sort itself out. It might not be easy and it's going to be complicated. It could be painful. And, but also, like Danielle said, there are a lot of us who have gone through this in all the different facets and nuances of it. And it can feel really isolating, but a lot of us are out there and would love to talk about it and be
Yeah.
there for you.
Yeah.
It's an honor.
So how can people connect with you?
They can find all my socials, everything on susanford.com.
Oh, that's so easy. Susan Ford is easy to spell too.
Easy to, it's much easier than beyond the parentheses. I have that website too, but I know that no one's going to be able to spell that. So
Okay,
susanford.com, you can connect with me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn.
Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing your story with me today and with my audience. I know this is going to help so many people.
Thank you, Danielle. I really appreciate you.
And thank you, audience, for listening today. Listen to this again and again. If this touches your heart, listen to it and get the courage to speak up, to search for the truth, to heal your heart. If you've been dealing with this, and reach out to Susan, reach out to me. You don't have to do this alone. So until next time, I love you.